firefighters have rushed to a blazing house fire in the Wilkes-Barre suburb of Dallas in Pennsylvania. And when the fire is extinguished, the body of Bryan Kocis is found lying on a couch among the ashes.
Sean's trying to break free. He wants to make his own movies, and Bryan is not willing to let him loose of the contract.
They offered an obscene amount of money to do, a couple of scenes, and I just was like, this is ridiculous.
He was his own worst enemy.
Joe stormed in afterwards, went right up to where Bryan Kocis was with one swipe, slashed his throat.
To answer your question, no, I didn't do it.
On a cold January night in 2007, a fire tore through a home in Dallas Township, Pennsylvania. The blaze, ferocious and unrelenting, consumed almost everything in its path. But when firefighters extinguished the flames, they discovered something far more sinister than the aftermath of an accidental fire. Beneath the charred remains, there was a body. But because the fire was so devastating, they had to use dental records to identify who that body belonged to. They discovered that the body belonged to Bryan Kocis, who was a prominent producer in the gay adult film industry. What initially seemed like a tragic accident soon revealed itself as one of the most calculated and horrific murders in recent history. Bryan Kocis was born on May 28, 1962, in Larksville, Pennsylvania. Described by those who knew him as intelligent and introverted, Bryan pursued a career in healthcare, working as a radiologic technologist. At age 24, Bryan was able to pay $56,000 for a two-story home with a big picture window at 60 Midland Drive. He seemed to be killing it, but it all took a 180 when he quit his job and tried to start selling cell phone service. It flopped, and Bryan was so strapped for cash that he had to declare bankruptcy. And then we fast forward a couple years, and Bryan was now one of the most successful producers in the gay adult film industry. I couldn't find any set concrete information about the years between when he filed for bankruptcy and became a huge producer, but I do know, and I read a lot about how he was very into the internet and always sleuthing around the internet, so I'm assuming that is where he thought of the idea. But I am fascinated with his career trajectory and how he ended up in the adult film industry. It's very interesting. Regardless, by the early 2000s, Bryan had started Copra Video, and his company quickly gained prominence in the gay adult film industry, creating content that targeted a younger demographic, often featuring performers portraying a youthful persona, we'll say. Gained both popularity and scrutiny. Critics accused Bryan of pushing the boundaries in ways that many found ethically questionable. And the content generated intense debate within the LGBTQIA+ world and beyond. And honestly, rightfully so, because Bryan did have a dark side to him. In 2002, police found a videotape in his home that involved sexual activity between himself and a 15-year-old boy. He had met the boy online and actually invited him to his Pennsylvania home. Bryan's defense was that the boy had lied about his age and was actually able to avoid jail time by pleading guilty to the one count of sexual abuse of children, which, when I read that, I was thinking to myself, even if you have one count of sexual abuse of children, that should be enough to get you in jail, but apparently it wasn't. It seems wild to me, but I guess because Bryan had a legitimate company and he had contracts signed with all his performers, stating their age and verifying their age, that he was let off the hook. The other day I opened up a data broker report on myself, and honestly, it was terrifying. My phone number, my email, my old addresses, even details about my family, all were just sitting there being sold to whoever wanted to buy it. That's how scammers, spammers, and even stalkers can get a hold of your information. And here's the part that really makes me angry. These companies are making billions selling our information without our consent. They don't care if it puts you at risk, because they make the process of opting out so complicated that most people just don't even do it. That's why I use today's sponsor, Aura. Aura identifies these shady broker sites that are selling your information and then automatically scrubs it off and keeps it off. You don't have to chase anyone down yourself. And Aura doesn't stop there. If your information shows up on the dark web, Aura alerts you. If someone tries to open up a credit card in your name, Aura sends you a real-time fraud alert. It's basically every layer of protection all in one app. 24/7 monitoring, a VPN, antivirus, password manager, US-based support, and if the worst does happen, Aura includes up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. You can try Aura for free at aura.com/MattCullen. In those 2 weeks, you'll actually see where your information is being exposed, and then you'll see Aura work on removing it. Thank you, Aura, so much for sponsoring today's video, and now back to the video. Bryan, still a free man, focused his energy on building his company, Cobra Video, and actually uses controversy to propel Cobra Video more into the mainstream. And it worked. Quote, the garage of his 2-story home on Midland Drive overflowed with expensive rides. A BMW, a Maserati, an Aston Martin. Most of his wealth came from filming twinks, young boys who are the age of consent but don't look it. And in his stable of boys, none was more of a star and more responsible for paying for those cars than Sean Lockhart. Bryan had scouted Sean online, and after Sean had signed 2 contracts with Bryan, they began working together a lot. In addition to getting paid per scene that he shot, Sean was gifted a 2002 Volkswagen Jetta, a cell phone plan, and an unspecified signing bonus. They continued to shoot scenes together. They shot in Hawaii and California, and as their working relationship deepened, Bryan became very possessive over Sean, needing to know what he was doing at all hours of the day, who he was with, where he was at, everything. And it started to become very concerning. These films that Bryan had shot with Sean, who chose the name Brent Corrigan, will actually continue to use Brent Corrigan now throughout the video, but these videos became top sellers in the adult film industry. Brent Corrigan became a star. One film, Schoolboy Crush, I believe was the most downloaded gay adult film in 2004. But the success of Brent Corrigan ultimately was the divide between him and Bryan, because Brent was making, I think, around $2,000 a film, which was industry standard at that time, but Bryan was reportedly making $2 million a year. So that imbalance doesn't really seem fair, especially because Brent himself was the star. In 2005, during a legal battle with Bryan over the use of his performances and of his stage name Brent Corrigan, Brent dropped a bomb. He had been underage when he appeared in several of Cobra Video's productions. Those shoots in Hawaii and California we were talking about, Brent was only 17 years old and still a junior in high school, which makes his involvement illegal, of course. This admission sent shockwaves throughout the adult film industry and opened a Pandora's box of legal and ethical questions about how such content had been produced and distributed without verification of his age. This revelation put Bryan under intense scrutiny, and rightfully so. But of course, Bryan, just like last time, denied that he knew of Brent's age and insisted that Brent had falsified his information on the application. Nevertheless, the damage to Bryan's reputation was already done. For Brent Corrigan himself, the disclosure was both a turning point and a burden for him. He later stated that he felt exploited by Cobra Video and used the controversy as a springboard to start his own career. By distancing himself from Bryan and Cobra Video, Brent sought to rebrand himself as an independent producer and performer, though the shadow of his underage performances would follow him for years. For Bryan, he was now on the hunt for his next Brent Corrigan. He actually found somebody who went by the name of Danny Moylan, who, through the pictures that Bryan had received, looked too good to be true. Quote, would love to meet with you and talk about filming and stuff, Moylan wrote. Don't have much experience with all of this, may need to be taught first. Bryan invited Danny to his home on January 24th, 2007, and he was thrilled to have found his new moneymaker. There isn't too much concrete details about what happened on this night. Supposedly, they opened a bottle of wine, Bryan showed Danny his upstairs bedroom, and suggested that the boy move in with him. There was no sign of forced entry in the house, no struggle, nothing to indicate that Bryan sensed what was coming.
Investigators say Bryan Kocis didn't die in the fire that took place right here. He was dead already.
Neighbors of Bryan's reported seeing smoke and flames engulf his home. Firefighters arrived to find a gruesome scene. Bryan's body was burned so badly that they had to use dental records in order to identify his body. But as investigators started to piece together the evidence, it became clear that this was no mere house fire. Bryan had been stabbed 28 times. His throat was slashed so deeply that it bordered decapitation. The fire, they determined, had been deliberately set to destroy evidence of the crime. The question loomed: who would commit such a brutal act, and why? But the investigation quickly took a dramatic turn. Detectives soon discovered Bryan's tumultuous relationship with Brent Corrigan, because at that time, Bryan and Brent were still in a legal dispute over Brent's use of his own performances and his own legal name. But Brent himself denied having any involvement with the murder, and his alibi checked out. So if not him, who stood to gain from Bryan's death? They soon found out that Danny Moylan, the young man who was in the house of Bryan's the night of the fire, was a fake identity.
We got numerous calls from the Virginia Beach area saying, hey, this isn't Danny Moylan, this is Harlow Cuadra.
His real name was Harlow Cuadra, and he was a young Navy veteran turned male escort living in Virginia Beach. Supposedly, a few weeks before the gruesome murder took place, Harlow and his boyfriend, Joseph Kerekes, another male escort, had met Brent at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. The two boyfriends had an ambition to dominate the gay adult film industry, and while meeting with Brent, Harlow threw out the idea of going into business with him, even, I think, offering Brent $20,000 for his first film together. I mean, to Brent, that must have been very enticing, especially if you think about how Bryan was only paying him $2,000 for each film. But the only problem was Bryan.
They offered an obscene amount of money to do, a couple of scenes, and I was like, this is ridiculous. You guys are out of your mind.
Because of the contracts Brent had signed, Bryan still owned the name Brent Corrigan. At that dinner in Vegas, Harlow told Brent that he, quote, knows someone who would do anything for him. This revelation made us all wonder, had Brent Corrigan arranged for Bryan's death? It seemed to make sense. I mean, seeing that Brent wanted to get out of his partnership with Bryan and also felt exploited by Bryan in Cobra Video, especially with him being underage and Bryan making millions of dollars off of him and his name. Many wondered if Bryan was finally paying the price for his actions. Supposedly, after the meeting with Brent, Harlow found Bryan's address by running a background check. A couple days later, on January 22nd, he created a new email account and emailed Bryan saying that he, quote, would love to model. Quote, the next day at 9:44 a.m., surveillance cameras picked up Harlow and Joseph walking into Superior Pawn and Gun Shop in Virginia Beach. They left with two items, a knife and a .38 caliber revolver with ammunition. After, Harlow rented a silver SUV. Joseph booked a room for the two at the Fox Ride Inn 11 miles from Bryan's house. The day after the murder, Harlow called Brent and told him to watch the news. Brent was shocked.
Investigators say Bryan Kocis didn't die in the fire that took place right here. He was dead already. Stabbed more than 25 times. His throat was slashed from ear to ear. And the fire itself was no accident. It was intentionally set by the killers to cover their tracks.
The police were very fast on finding Harlow, and the evidence just started to mount. Phone records placed them near Bryan's home on the night of the murder. A witness reported seeing a white or silver SUV leaving the house as it was on fire. Emails and online chats revealed their fixation on Brent and how they wanted to get rid of Bryan. And as police started to narrow in on these two, they tried to use their newfound infamy as suspected killers to help propel their business even more. Quote, they even offered Harlow's clients in Virginia Beach a special brand of role-playing. Harlow's not a killer, but he'll act like one if you want him to. To me, I can see parallels between them and Bryan, because Bryan kind of used his awful notoriety of the underage situation to kind of propel his business, where he's, shooting adult film with people that look underage, even though supposedly they're not, but they were, but regardless. And now Bryan and Joseph and Harlow are now using their newfound infamy as like maybe the killers to kind of help with their business too. But the most damning evidence came in their own words. In a taped conversation with an informant, Harlow and Joseph described killing in detail, claiming Bryan's death was, quote, a necessary evil for their business aspirations. 4 months after the killing, the two were arrested and charged for homicide, robbery, and arson. Surprisingly, both pleaded innocent. I didn't do it. I didn't kill that man. To pay for his defense, Harlow sold free Harlow t-shirts, teddy bears, and thongs. The trial absolutely captivated the nation. Harlow and Joseph's defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, pointing to the possibilities of other suspects who might have wanted to kill Bryan. But prosecutors painted a damning picture of greed and ambition, spiraling into cold-blooded murder. Witnesses, including Brent himself, took the stand, adding further intrigue to an already sensationalized case. Brent testified about the legal battles he was dealing with Bryan, and that Harlow and Joseph had wanted Brent to join their company. The most damning piece of evidence came from a recorded conversation between Harlow and another adult film producer, whom investigators enlisted as an informant. In this conversation, Harlow and Joseph bragged about the murder, describing it as a necessary evil to advance their business ventures. Harlow was even overheard saying, quote, it was quick, referring to how Bryan was killed.
He was his own worst enemy. I think, at least my assessment is, I think he did very poorly on the stand. He was contradictory, utterly inconsistent.
Further forensic evidence tied Harlow and Joseph to the scene. Investigators recovered a knife that belonged to Harlow that was the type of knife that matched the crime of the scene. Additionally, DNA evidence and burnt remnants of items that belonged to the two of them were discovered at the crime scene and traced back to them. In December 2008, Joseph pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in a deal to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Will you testify against Harlow? You told us you were innocent before. Why'd you change your mind?
Give an apology.
Anything at all, Joe?
Joe, I absolutely will not testify for the state against Harlow.
Harlow, on the other hand, went to trial in February 2009. The prosecution presented a compelling case, showcasing the recorded conversations, forensic evidence, and the duo's clear motive.
I wish Harlow thinks of our son every night, that evil thing that he did to him.
It'll never be over for us. I mean, we'll always remember our son, and I have his ring on right here. And he was the best son anybody could ever have.
After weeks of testimony and deliberation, Harlow was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Cuadra will spend the rest of his life in prison. That ruling came after a jury failed to reach a unanimous decision in favor of the death penalty, following his capital murder conviction last week.
Their arrest marked a turning point in the investigation and sent shocking waves throughout the adult entertainment industry. Even though there was no evidence that Brent was involved in any way whatsoever with the murder, his reputation and his name was pretty much tarnished within the industry. They talk about how Brent ended up working at American Apparel after this whole incident happened, where he made $8.50 and he also sold his underwear online. And the real bummer for Brent is that before Bryan had passed, when they were going into legal disputes, Bryan made it his mission that Brent would never be able to get rich off his own name, even going so far as creating another website where he just uploaded all of Brent's videos on the website for free. Over the years, the case has been the subject of documentaries, books, and there was even a movie made called King Cobra, starring Christian Slater as Bryan. When the movie came out, actually, Brent was less than thrilled, writing, quote, "No true telling about it, not approved by me." I actually found this Twitter thread, and when a fan had tweeted him asking him, well then how are they able to use your name if you don't approve of it? Brent wrote back, quote, "I gave them permission to use my name, but explicitly made it clear that the story was heinous and not sanctioned. They told me they couldn't change their screenplay after we entered negotiations. The screenplay," I'm assuming he meant, "was the fault line." Here's a side-by-side of Brent and the actor who played Brent, and to me they look very similar. It's very accurate casting. I mean, I haven't seen the movie myself, but just off of appearance-wise, it's a good fit. And what's interesting is Harlow, on the other side, told press the movie is very lifelike and very true. Quote, "Even some of the quotes, I have no idea how they captured that. Who's to say exactly what happened that night and whose story is true? But either way, the true horror of what happened on that January night remains as haunting as ever. The story of Bryan himself, the rise, his controversies, and his violent death is a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and the devastating consequences that it can bring." When I thought about the story, and as I sat down to really flesh out the story in my own mind, I thought about if justice was served and who deserved justice. But the one person I keep going back to thinking about is Brent Corrigan himself. He was so young and he got himself entangled in this dark side of the adult entertainment industry. And because of the fame and the money he could bring to these producers, his name was the front headline for this murder. And it's odd because even before diving deep into this case, of course I knew about what it was, but I didn't know any of the details, and I just always assumed Brent was way more involved in the actual murder than he was. To me, I see Brent as someone who was taken advantage of by Bryan. At 17, he got swooped into this world of fame and money and power. I mean, at 17, we all could have made that decision just like Brent did. We all have dreams, to make a better life for ourselves. And I feel for Brent that he got swooped into that world and made these decisions before he was a grown adult and found himself entangled in this mess. This case also makes me think of the progression of adult film. And of course, I'm not super well versed on the world because I'm not an adult entertainer myself, but I have interviewed many adult film stars in the past 2.5 years of doing my series on YouTube, and it seems like nowadays these performers have a lot more autonomy over their bodies and their business, which is great. I think it's probably to do with sites like OnlyFans, where they are now in control more so of their own careers. But it's definitely a fascinating look into what that world looked like back in the day. Thank you for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's a little different than the last couple episodes I've done on Queer Case Files, but I have been fascinated with this case for so long and I've been genuinely interested to learn about it. And so it was a really interesting, and I just found myself deep in the trenches of the story and thought you might find it fascinating as well. Make sure to let me know in the comments below what story you'd like to see me dive into next on Queer Case Files. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon. Okay, bye.